Hello, I'm Rona Pringle from CAD Consultants, one of the support and learning partner team for Climate Action Fund. This is a presentation from one of the coffee mornings, which was an introduction to the Climate Adaptation and Resilience Learning Signpost. First of all, just going to give a quick introduction to descriptions or definitions of climate adaptation and resilience, because we often find that the terms are used interchangeably. So the first description or definition comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for Climate Adaptation, which describes this as the process of adjustment to actual or expected climate and its effects. It goes on to say that the role of local communities is an important one in climate adaptation, saying that successful adaptation not only depends on governments, but also on the active and sustained engagement of stakeholders, including local communities, and goes on to mention other organisations that need to be engaged in that as well. And the UK Climate Change Committee describes well-adapted communities as those that are adequately prepared for climate and weather extremes and can respond to weather and climate emergencies when they do occur to minimise their impacts. And it goes on to set out the importance of having thriving natural ecosystems that can prosper despite climate change. And in terms of climate resilience, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, describes climate resilience as the ability to anticipate, prepare for, and respond to hazardous events, trends, or disturbances related to climate. So that's more about preparedness to address the impact of climate change. And in this learning signpost, we have got some learnings from 3 Climate Action Fund programmes: Stamford Nature Wales, Resilient Bude, and Ouse Valley Climate Action. Most of the Climate Action Fund projects so far have focused on climate mitigation. So what we've done in this learning signpost is to capture successes and learnings from these 3 projects that are striving to enable communities to adapt to and become more resilient to climate change as part of their projects. But their projects also do include elements of climate mitigation. A lot of the focus, as we'll see, and the learnings are about laying the foundations for climate adaptation and resilience to be developed in the long term. So a lot of the findings you'll see are around engagement, and therefore may well be relevant to projects that don't necessarily have a specific climate adaptation or resilience focus. Apologies. So the first project, Stamford Nature Wales, is a pan-Wales project which it's aiming to inspire and empower young people to take action for nature in their communities and beyond. And it's being delivered by a partnership of 6 Welsh wildlife trusts. The second project, Resilient Bude, was developed by the Bude Climate Partnership, which is a group of local environmental organisations who are working together to develop positive community-led climate change responses throughout the wider Bude area. And the last project is Ouse Valley Climate Action, OVCA, which is aiming to bring the community together to inspire positive action to mitigate the effects of climate change in the lower Ouse Valley and Havens area. So the first project that we're looking at learnings from is the Stand for Nature project. And there are 2 key things that they've learned. The biggest one is time. It's a youth-focused project, so the amount of time and the biggest challenge that they faced is how much time it takes to deliver elements of the project when it is trying to be youth-led, developing relationships with young people and building them to a point where they feel sufficiently confident and knowledgeable to develop and implement their own ideas. The project team have found that the events and activities that are truly youth-led and where the messaging and communication is delivered by youth forums are far more effective at engaging with local communities than if the project team were leading on that instead. And it's a much more effective channel they found for engaging the wider community, but it does take time. And the second element is around the youth mentors. They recognised that it would take time for the regional youth forums to build. So they did factor into the project a development year for all of the partner trusts, with the idea being that the lead Wildlife Trust, North Wales Wildlife Trust, would use that year to support the other partner trusts using their established youth forum as a template that the partner trusts could base their forums on. And it did work to a degree, but they recognised it would have been more effective if they could have had a selection of individuals from existing forums available to be mentors, who could then travel with the project team to the other regions to help and support and encourage prospective new youth participants. And they think that that would have provided more momentum going into the second year of the project and perhaps help them achieve some of the things sooner. The second project that we're looking at learnings from is Resilient Bude. And there are three areas of learnings that were identified in the early part of the programme as regards climate adaptation and resilience. The first one was how critical the development phase was for them. One of the project team used an African saying, which was, if you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk with friends. And they use that analogy that in the development phase, Resilient Bude project needed to walk fast and alone, and said it had a very focused, streamlined approach to its work. But they did have a long development phase, and through that managed to discover the routes to its destination. And now they've moved into the main project phase. They need to walk far and with friends. So it has expanded the partnership and taken in a lot more new local organisations. The second learning that they had was about widening community engagement, to cast, suggesting you need to cast your net wide during the development phase of a project to engage as many people as possible and take in a wide range of ideas to ensure that local ownership happens of ideas and projects that emerge. They had a key finding in that development phase was that the project team needed to work with different people and on different projects than they originally thought that they would. Originally, they thought the main project would be on reducing carbon emissions, but actually they found that the focus needed to be on adaptation and resilience. And the last finding from, or learning, apologies, from the Resilient Bude project was about the need to encourage new and different people to get involved. Bude, being a small and relatively isolated community, thought that it was quite difficult to get a critical mass of people to contribute. Often the same faces getting involved, and that expectations can often be low. In an area with few facilities and limited funding. But they did say that new recruits can be found in unexpected places, and gave an example of the day that they had to mark COP26, Global Day of Action, and a participant got involved who they described as a stalwart pillar of the community, involved in many local establishment organisations. And through turning up to that event, it turned out that they had a very long, distinguished career in science before they retired, and had been concerned about climate change for decades. So if they hadn't turned up at that event, they wouldn't have been able to be recruited to the Bude Climate Partnership, and they now chair that. So it's hoping that future work that they're doing, such as citizens jury, and in the main phase of their project, their storytelling project, they'll be able to develop that further. And the last project that's been involved in this learning signpost is Ouse Valley Climate Action. And you'll see there are some similarities in some of these projects in terms of findings. So local engagement was one of the key findings and learnings from them at the early stage, that engaging local groups and other key stakeholders has been an important part of their approach. Using existing resources, so they have used the Centre for Alternative Technologies Zero Carbon Britain online courses and associated report. They found that really helpful in the early stages in explaining paths to net zero, and also facilitating networking with other like-minded projects around the country. And there are also some other resources that they identify in the Zero Carbon Britain Resource Hub, and recordings of talks and online events from the Centre for Alternative Technology. The next finding that they had, or learning, apologies, was that some of the Ouse Valley Climate Action team have trained as carbon literacy trainers, and they're now cascading that training through the wider project team and community through their partner Community Energy South. And they found that community literacy training is a very good starting point for the projects that they're supporting. And the last learning from them is about piloting new ideas. They are piloting an approach with One Planet using for 3 months with some additional funding from Innovate UK to trial drawing multiple stakeholder climate action plans together into one. They described it as an accessible ecosystem to reduce silo working and trying to accelerate progress towards net zero across the wider South Downs National Park area. So it was an opportunity that presented itself that they have seized and are looking at how that works. And the last thing, a couple of last things, there are some other resources that we identify in the learning signpost. The National Lottery Community Fund has produced an insight document on the natural environment, which does include some elements of climate adaptation. Bristol Green Capital, one of the climate action funded projects, has produced a resource on resilience for their climate action programme, and that should say for businesses, so apologies. And the last resource there was Communities Prepared, is a project that was funded by the National Lottery Community Fund to empower communities to be better placed and prepare for, respond to, and recover from flooding and other emergencies. So adaptation and resilience combined in that. In the learning signpost, which is on the, you can access through the Linktree or the OneDrive, it's got all of the links to all of these resources. It's also got within it links to each of the 3 projects that are included within the signpost, and it also includes the successes that those projects have achieved so far. So I would suggest having a look at that, looking at some of the projects, some of the successes and learnings, and if it's of relevance and interest to your project, also looking at some of these resources that are identified at the end of the learning signpost. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll stop the recording.